If you're a man around my age, raise your hand. I'm going 58, all right? I want to take you when you're younger and you think about when you're 58 years old. We want to look back at your childhood when all of a sudden we talk about what affected us when we were younger. We were told that being human was different. As a young kid, it was about standing up to who we believed in, what we talked about, and who we were all standing for. But the greatest thing that we learned was actually, what does it mean to stand up and be noticed? We forgot as a young kid that our emotions were important, and life changed with every emotion. So I'm going to take you back to the spring of 2020, in the heart of the pandemic. My neighbor Francois and I were sitting 6 feet apart in his backyard shed. Just two grown men watching the world unravel and watching hockey. Businesses were closing, hospitals were overflowing, and everybody was scared. And so were we. But that shed was a place of sanctuary, a place to exhale. And me being a man, I knew I needed to one-up my neighbor Francois. It was very important to me. So what I did is I built this shed. It had a heating floor system, HVAC from side to side, central controlled air. You push button, it was perfect. The ceiling was walnut with integrated lighting throughout. The walls were all rock. It doubled as a podcast studio. It was soundproof. Oh, and by the way, it's one of the most cost-effective ways of saving square footage in your house. Just say. So, this is Francois' shed. Pretty nice, eh? That's Francois. It all starts there. That's my shed. Okay. Now, this is the crazy part because we're actually side by side. So, technically, I think I kicked his butt. But all seriousness, something happened while we were actually making that shed, and more importantly, while we started spending time in it. We started to communicate. Not about hockey, but about fatherhood, about fear, about failure. Things that we wouldn't normally ever talk about. And the strangest part, it felt normal. Just two guys sitting in the shed talking about things we never even know we needed to say. And that's when I had to ask myself a better question. Why did that shed feel okay to be comfortable? It wasn't because I created this great big man cave. There was a catalyst, a clue to something bigger that was happening in our society that actually needs our attention. And this is what it is. Now, the numbers according to the CDC has it that men between the ages of 55 and 75 years of age is the highest suicide rate. With middle-aged white men, 70% of all suicides. Now, the National Institute of Mental Health says that men are least likely to seek help for depression or anxiety. The numbers are only 6%. Not because they're fine, because they were taught to hide when they're not. Now, standard mental health models have it going to a therapist's office face-to-face, works in some cases. But for the majority of men, it doesn't work. It's not because they're broken. It's because that mental model just doesn't work for most men. Now think about it. When you actually have a deep conversation with a man, do you actually sit down and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about, tell me your feelings. How are you really feeling right now? No. It's when you're sitting on a fishing boat, fishing. Or you're working on a car together. Or you're in the garage working on a project. In other words, it's actually when you're shoulder to shoulder and not face to face. There's actually a name for this. This pattern is called parallel activity. Researchers have studied it, and they've vastly said that majority of men seek help through shared activities together. It's not avoidance. They call it scaffolding. It's a way to make hard conversations possible. And this is what it did for me. We were sitting in the shed. There's no fancy lights, no fancy couches, just a hockey net in the corner, a couple old chairs. But what it did have was comfort, privacy, familiarity, no pressure to perform, no intake form, just a place to be human. And other men had actually felt the same way, because months later, that shed became the greatest hangout place in town. Dozens of men would come by, they would connect, and we would just be. Businesses were closed, airports were empty, and we're all on the same playing field. It didn't matter how much money you had, how successful you were, we were all in the same situation. But there was this one guy in particular, a business owner. He owned a bar, a restaurant, a construction company. Now, on the outside, he had it all together. But that pandemic hit him hard. We were sitting there, shoulder to shoulder, talking about how the world had slowed down, how business had stopped, how travel had stopped. And then he started to talk about his divorce and how lost he felt without the busyness of his business to hide behind. He looks at me. He goes quiet. And he says to me, "Can I tell you something? I'm thinking about ending my life." He started to unpack things he hadn't said in years. Shame, the lack of purpose, it all came out. That conversation changed me. Why there? Why then? And that's when I realized it wasn't about me building this shed. It was about me creating space physically and emotionally that allowed this man to open up and feel safe. And he dropped his armor. Now, I'm not saying that sheds replace therapy. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that we need to look at the definition of what support looks like. Because when we make vulnerability accessible on men's terms, we actually make healing happen. So, how does this look like in practice? Step 1, understanding the importance of the environment. A shed, a workshop, a garage. Now, these may seem all trivial, but for us men, it's familiar. It's like the smell of sawdust in the air or the hum of a fan actually tells us we're not being watched. We're here. Step 2, honor male communication patterns. Don't force eye contact. Don't rush the silence. Let the activity happen while you're in the event, like chopping wood, fixing the bike, sorting tools. Let the activity be the anchor, not the obstacle. Number 3, redefine what support looks like. Because support isn't about going, hey, how are you feeling? It's actually, hey, why don't we do something together tonight? Because hard conversations is not about just going to the door. We need to go through it. Step 4, create space with intention. If you're a leader, if you're a coach, a father, a friend, ask yourself, where are the safe places for the men in my life? Not metaphorically, literally. Can you really ask yourself, can we actually do an activity together tonight? Now, you don't need funding. You don't need a therapist degree. All you need is the space, the activity, and the willingness not to judge. And this is what happened to me a few years ago. I was 240 pounds, sleep apnea, gout, cancer, AFib. I didn't need a therapist, and yes, I do have a doctor. That's important. But what I did need was that shed. Because I could sit in that shed and not feel exposed. I was able to open up just like every other man. Now, crazy part here. Once you see how powerful this is, you will never unsee it. You will go for a morning walk, and you'll notice that shed talk moment. You'll go on a camping trip, and there it is again, another moment where you can have that conversation. You'll go out for breakfast, and it'll be a long bacon and eggs. It'll be a drawn-out occasion. And all of a sudden, that conversation happens again. It's right there. You don't need 4 walls. You just need intention. So I want to ask you this question. Where is the shed in your life? And more importantly, who are you going to ask to step into it? Because every man out there needs to have the weight taken off of his shoulders of saying, you know what, I'm fine, I'm okay, I can get through this, everything's great. And pick up something much more powerful. The truth, connection, and maybe grab a couple hockey sticks while you're there. Thank you very much. Good.